what is worse, touching something that is surprisingly slimy or touching something that is surprisingly sticky?
Oh, for me, it's gotta be sticky's worse.
Yeah,
Because sticky stays with you more. Slimy, you can kind of wipe off on your pants. Sticky, that doesn't leave you.
No,
I completely agree. I can't handle sticky. I
I'm
can't.
not saying slimy's good, but sticky's worse.
Slimy is easier to repair.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can fix that quickly. But sticky, that you're right, that stays with you.
for sticky, all I need to do is find a hard edge of something, and I can just scrape it off on like a solid hard corner. I can't do slimy. Whenever I've got to like get hands in when I'm cooking, and it's like I get olive oil and shit all over my hands, it is a race. I've got the water running in the sink and the soap like right there. And I'm trying to do it with only one hand, so I still have normalcy with the other hand.
Right.
Hate it.
So you're not a meatball or meatloaf guy then?
See, that's fine. It's that the absolute like slimy oil. Like I remember, like, I mean, I was a child of the 80s. When you got chapped lips, you didn't get chapstick. Your mother would come over and they'd smear Vaseline.
Tub of Vaseline.
There's no grosser texture to me than Vaseline because it's slimy, and I can't fucking do it. So I don't know what it is. Sticky's not good, but slimy's the fucking worst.
I guess we know where you land on Vaseline now. Good.
And now everybody knows something about me I didn't mean to put the internet.
Yeah.
Welcome to the It's a Mimic podcast, where you never know what you're going to get.
Welcome back to It's a Mimic, where you never know what you're going to get. Today we're finally kicking off our discussion on Oozes in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I'm Adam, and with me today are Terry and Brad, and this episode is called Putting the Heroes to Death.
Well done.
In this episode of the It's a Mimic podcast, this panel of Dungeon Masters is going to slorp and squelch our way through the most iconic oozes in Dungeons & Dragons.
But before we get into it, I want to ask, how often do you guys use oozes in your games?
Let's roll initiative.
Let's do it. 16 for me.
2.
19.
19. Terry's our winner.
Terry.
So how often do you use oozes, Terry?
I just started to use them quite often. I've come to the end of that part of my game, but it was by pure chance, a couple of random box mini random boxes, and then got 2 oozes, got a black pudding and got a dragon blood ooze, and I thought, well, this is destiny. Clearly I need to use this as soon as I can. It was great. It's they're a bigger threat than you realize, and it can go wrong very quickly. So I really enjoyed them.
Nice. I tend to use them early game. I'll throw them at players when they're exploring dungeons early on. They've got a lot of gotcha mechanics in them, so I do like to use them early, but I find the further I go along, the more underpowered and underwhelming I find them, so they kind of drop out of favor.
They're tier 1 bad guys for me, and then they are tier 2 traps, and then I find myself homebrewing and really setting up like a death maze of oozes in tier 3 once, and then I don't touch them after that. But I quite like dropping 7 gelatinous cubes and a whole bunch of hapless NPCs, and now we have a puzzle, right, to go rescue and fight in like a large space with a whole bunch of weird narrow turns and shit. Like, that's fun for me. So it depends on what it is, but like I tend not to use them, and I don't think I've ever used any of the fucking weird ones that we'll cover in the next couple episodes. I don't think I've ever touched them, so it's been only the ones that we're talking about today, but I've used each of them. I just ran my players against 2 gelatinous cubes, and they were never in danger, but their shit was, and their NPCs were, right?
And in some ways for players, that's a lot scarier. They can handle their own PCs being in danger. It's when you put the NPCs and their gear in danger that they freak out.
It is so annoying though when your gear gets damaged, especially if you're as keen on the rules as I am. I like the threats to be real, and if that happens to me, I'm more frustrated at myself that I let that happen than I would be the DM. Like, how dare the DM use that ability? Of course they're supposed to, but it is stressful.
Well, before we get engulfed by this conversation, let's head into a short info break.
We've previously covered quite a bit in our discussion on monsters in 5th edition. For all those episodes and more, you can follow or subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and dozens of other podcast apps. If you'd like to support us, you can donate through the website, check out our store, or join our Patreon and get access to other episodes and series. If you'd like to pay for some ad space on It's a Mimic, or just send a shout out to a friend, please reach out to us through our email and website that are listed in the show notes below.
Hey, this is Adam with a quick reminder to check out our Patreon if you haven't already. All patrons do get access to the Patreon-only Discord, but the real gem, of course, is the additional bonus episodes that you'll get. For Copper Wormling tier patrons, there are all of the Campaign Builder episodes, including all of Tier 2 and Tier 3 of play, and of course we're launching into Tier 4 pretty quickly. There's also 7 bonus episodes that Dan and I had recorded way back in the day that never got an official edit or release, and they're a part of this conversation as well. For Bronze Young patrons, there are not just the Legend Lore episodes that go into the backlog of 5th edition, but there are also some episodes about other tabletop role-playing games, and the Legend Lore online series, which breaks down all of the D&D Beyond and online material for 5th edition that has been released by Wizards of the Coast. And then of course, you also get access to the Campaign Builder episodes. For Silver and Adult tier, you get access to all of that, but also bonus episodes that have been released as supplements to regular episodes, or are just sidebar bonus rants. And the Homebrew series, where I sit down and talk about how I handle different aspects of 5th edition in unique and interesting ways at my own table. There's also the Gold Ancient tier, which gives you access to all of that stuff, as well as input on topics in some future episodes, as well as a quarterly special episode featuring at least one host dedicated to answering any specific questions that you have about D&D, so it's kind of like a personal mailbag. And then, of course, there's the Metallic Great Worm, which you guys hear all of the time, where there's a Zoom call with at least one host that's going to be recorded and released as a bonus episode every handful of months. So for those of you who haven't checked out the Patreon, or you're not quite sure if it's for you, I hope this breakdown helps a little bit, and I look forward to chatting with you guys at the very least in the comments on the public forum. Anyway, let's get back to the episode. So, I mean, I guess we got to start at the basics, hey? Like, what is an ooze? Because we have really never talked about them, and we're 294 episodes in. So, for those of you who don't know somehow, oozes are creatures that rarely have a definitive shape or form, although some high-level oozes can hold a shape for a while, and there is one famous one who maintains a 6-sided, 3-dimensional geometrical shape, but we'll touch on that later. They usually like to stay underground, acting as scavengers and opportunists who engulf, dissolve, consume, and absorb whatever items, objects, and creatures they happen to find. They almost never have true organs, including sensory organs, but some high-level oozes that we won't be talking about today can morph and change to create a convincing facsimile of a functional organ. Ladies. For the most part, they tend to be unaligned. They observe the world with their blind sight ability, and most of them are too stupid to even understand that languages exist. The good news is that they're slow, and it's easy to get outside of the range where they can even perceive you. And then they're blind to you and they don't know where you are. The bad news is that they are relentless because they don't need to sleep. They're drawn towards both warmth and movement, and most of them can climb to some degree and can lash out with pseudopods, ladies. But where do they come from? Terry's rolling his eyes every time I do that. It's great.
I'm wondering why you're being exclusive.
All right. I'm sorry. I'll change it up. Everyone deserves a good pseudopod every once in a while. So where do they come from? Some sources say that they are the children of Jublex, the faceless lord, the demon lord of oozes. And other sources say that they're actually parts of Jublex that have broken free. The reason he's called Lord of Oozes is because A, he's a massive ooze, and B, he can bestow a baseline of intelligence and sentience to oozes nearby. When they gain this rudimentary sentience, though, it's tinged with malice and evil. Other creatures have noticed that oozes can be sort of corralled and controlled in a limited fashion and have kept them as defenders of underground passageways and consumers of evidence. A lot of times, the best way to do this is by using fire to draw it near and encourage it to stay in a particular area. So, what do adventurers need to know? The different kind of oozes are usually easily identifiable by their color, shape, and behavior. Well, shape such as it is. Sometimes different oozes have trouble dissolving certain kinds of materials, and no ooze can absorb magical items. That means that once an ooze is killed, you might just find some good loot inside of it. If a creature is engulfed within an ooze, it's likely that they'll be dissolving and suffocating at the same time. But the death is a slow one, and adventurers can often reach in or even dive in and rescue a companion. If you are rescued or manage to escape, chances are good that a lot of your non-magical items will be destroyed to some degree, and your hair and appendages might also be compromised. If you aren't rescued in time, it's likely that you won't be able to be resurrected, because most resurrection magics require a body, and you, my friend, are just a second helping of soup at this point. Now, let's talk about a couple of the minor oozes themselves. But first, do you guys know about the ooze that isn't an ooze?
Ooze that isn't an ooze.
It used to be in previous editions, and that's the green slime. But it's so fucking basic, it doesn't even count as a CR0 because there's not even hit points or a chance to hit. You just
touch it and it's gone.
Yeah. So here's the deal. It's not actually a monster anymore, although it used to be, like I said. And these days, it's just considered a dungeon hazard and can be found on page 105 in the Dungeon Master's Guide, along with brown mold, webs, and yellow mold. Green slime is an acidic ooze that eats away organic materials and metals on contact. That includes flesh. Bright green, sticky, and wet. That's what we're dealing with here. It's so sticky, in fact, that it will cling to any surface until you're below it. It doesn't have hit points or an armor class or stats of any kind except the following. It covers a 5-foot area. It has blind sense out to 30 feet. If something moves beneath it, it will drop down onto the object. Have you ever wondered why people take 10-foot poles adventuring? This is one of the reasons. The only other mechanics are that if you're aware of the slime, it's a DC 10 dex save to avoid it. If you're not aware, you're fucked. You're going to get hit. If it lands on you, you take 1d10 acid damage immediately, or until you destroy it, or take an action to scrape it off, because otherwise it hits at the beginning of your turn for every turn afterwards for another 1d10 acid. If it lands on an object that isn't you, then it does 2d10 damage, acid damage, of course, and any non-magical wood or metal that comes in contact with it is destroyed on contact. If you don't want to sacrifice an item to scrape it off your character, then you can expose it to sunlight, any effect that cures diseases, and that will include lay on hands, or hit it with cold, fire, or radiant damage. So the implication, although it doesn't say it directly, is if you try to wipe it off with your hands, you just keep burning. Someone else tries to use their bare hands, they just keep burning. So you need to scrape it off on something else, and it will eat that thing away.
Yeah, I actually, you and I both probably used these on our players recently doing White Plume Mountain. It's one of the early encounters, and it was my first time dealing with it.
I hit it underwater on the floor.
Yeah, I did the same.
Yeah, so
I actually threw 2 of them at my party. I had one on the ceiling, one on the floor, so it was unavoidable.
Well, it was funny because Dan knew exactly what it was, and he couldn't avoid it. He failed his jump check, his athletics check, and so he landed on it, and it ate through his boots, and he was mad about it. And then he walked another 5 feet and was mad that he was actually taking damage. He's like, but it ate through my boots already. I'm like, Dan, you're mad at gaming.
Yeah.
And also, you've got a lot further to go.
Yeah, it's taking up more than just a little space. There's more than just a little bit of this thing. Yeah, no, they're great.
Any thoughts about green slime before we move on, Terry?
I love it. I've never considered using green slime before. I think I've overlooked it, and I'm going to put it in somewhere. I love it.
I mean, you're going to see it in dungeons a lot, but why not also put it in a swamp or a mire or, on the side of a trail in a forest?
Like
put it on a rock.
Deep in caves, or even like outcroppings, right on the underside of outcroppings. I just feel like this is in every home in Barovia. Right? Like,
yeah, like it should be. I feel like even though you're taking damage, well, even still, it feels like it's expanding your exploration pillar as well. You're bringing the world to life a bit more. If you've got green slime, you're making environmental hazards more interesting.
And again, page 105 of the Dungeon Master's Guide, because it's not with the traps. It's this little subsection that is easily overlooked.
The environmental factors, right? It's grouped in with molds.
Yeah. So the next one I want to talk about, just to get the real basic one out of the way, is the gray ooze. This is the first and most basic ooze that we have for 5th edition. We get 1 sentence of lore and 1 sentence of description. The lore is that it is stone turned to liquid by chaos. Don't know what that means, but it sounds cool.
What does that mean? I mean,
and the description is that when it moves, it slithers like a liquid snake, rising to strike. That's what we know about it. That's everything we know about it. And while it might seem like this is a boring, colorless, formless puddle creature sitting at a CR half, there's actually a lot going on in its stat block. Before you get too excited, this thing is not going to last a single round in combat with an AC of 8 and an average of 22 hit points. The party is going to take it out pretty easily. I recommend giving it the maximum 31 hit points, so it might get to round 2 of combat if you're dealing with the level 1 or level 2 party. But here's what we have. It moves and climbs at only 10 feet per round, but it can squeeze through a space as small as 1 inch wide, despite it being the size of a human adult. It is medium sized. The fact that it has a minor bonus to stealth and the ability to resemble an oily pool or a wet rock if it stays motionless means that it might just get a hit in before initiative starts. This is an ambusher. All of its stats suck, except strength, which is okay, and con, which is decent. But it's resistant to acid, cold, and fire, and it can't be blinded, charmed, deafened, frightened, exhausted, or knocked prone. So as I said, fire's off the table, and that means melee attacks, right? Well, go right fucking ahead because you're going to regret it. Any metal weapon that is non-magical takes a permanent -1 to damage rolls as it is slowly corroded by acid simply by contacting the creature. If you roll to hit and hit, you damage your weapon. And this will happen over and over and over again until you get a cumulative -5 to damage, at which point your item is destroyed. There goes your weapon. And in tier 1, chances are good that you don't have magical weapons yet, so this will happen.
Yeah, early game, this is definitely more of a threat.
Yeah, and if you think that ranged attacks is the answer, then you should know that your ammo is going to get destroyed upon contact.
This is, what's the CR on this, Adam, again?
1/2.
Yeah, this is the first little test, I think, for your players, where they realized, oh, it's more than just I attack. Now I got to think more tactically for probably the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. This to me feels like the first time that your players are going to go, oh shit, dungeons are scary.
Yeah.
Nice thing too is at this point, like if they're using non-magical weapons, if you destroy one, your players aren't gonna get too mad at you either, because you're gonna fight something in the next room and oh look, there's the exact same weapon you just lost. You learned a lesson, but here you go.
Look, they're gonna complain regardless because you ruined their ancestral whatever, right?
Sure.
So,
yeah.
but
Don't take an ancestral weapon, people.
But before they complain, it's right in the freaking book. It says that a gray ooze can eat through 2-inch thick non-magical metal in a single round. That is almost as fast as the blood of the xenomorph from Alien. So like picture that level of acidity. Now, it only has 1 attack, but it's pretty effective, especially considering its level. It strikes with a pseudopod. Gentlemen, is that better, Brad?
There you go.
Yeah, okay.
Everybody's getting a chance here.
Yeah. And if it hits, it does 1d6 plus 1 bludgeoning damage and 2d6 acid damage. That's a combined 11 points of damage on average, which means this thing is swinging like a CR2 creature. And remember that rule about weapons getting corroded, that is also what happens to armor. Every hit on non-magical metal armor drops the AC bonus by 1 and destroys it completely if the AC bonus drops to -10. So, leather armor and cloth robes it is, gentlemen. That's what we got. That's what's going to save you. Now, the last thing I want to point out here is that there is a variant in the monster manual that represents one of these sentient versions of a gray ooze. They specifically name drop nearby mind flayers as a potential influence, but I personally like the corruption of Jublix better. Anyway, no matter what the origin, the psychic gray ooze gets a bump to intelligence up to 6, which is actually higher than a hill giant. And on top of this, it gets another action that recharges on a 5 or 6, so you know it's probably pretty good. It chooses 1 target that it can sense within 60 feet. Then it's a DC 10 intelligence saving throw, or that target takes 3d6 psychic damage, and yes, it's half damage on a successful save. You combine that with the false appearance so that people might not even know it's there, and you have essentially layer effects.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yeah, you put this in with another monster and they're going to they might not know where it's coming from, right?
So I don't want to dig too deeply into the gray ooze. I mean, it's just borderline a step above dungeon hazard. But let's grab dice and roll initiative really quickly because I do want to ask, how would you guys use this in a dungeon in a creative way?
Oh, 19 again.
14 for me.
I got a 19 as well. Roll off, Terry.
Yeah.
2 19s.
I got a 6.
4.
Oh, shit. All right. Are you using an online die roller, Terry?
Yeah.
I can see your face lights up every time you got to roll initiative.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's a little orange D20 going. Yeah.
So for me, the thing that I want to use great oozes for is going to be, I'm thinking an underground cavern system with some sort of like large cavern within this cave system that's pretty open, and it's got kind of like a waterfall, and it's very beautiful and pretty in here, a lot of like little geodes and crystals and things. And underwater, there are 3 or 4 of these gray oozes that are sitting there with the psychic ability. And so as you get close to the water, and you go in to drink from it and refill the water skins, or someone goes to investigate or explore, they're going to start making saves, but not just one. They'll make like 4 of these saves. It's only a DC 10, but in tier 1, you're bound to fail that at least once. And even on a successful save, you're taking a little bit. So someone's going to go over there and get psychically beat to shit, pass out, and then everyone else is going to run over to save them, and then they've got to take it. And now, quote unquote, the water is dangerous because they don't know it's the oozes. They have nothing to attack.
That's... Yeah, I know as a player, right? If it's hidden in the water, you're going to assume it's the water itself, especially if you're not seeing a large creature that's doing it.
Yeah, and if I've got geodes and crystals and shit all over the place, they will just assume that it's like an effect. And then when they move on to the next area or wherever they take their next rest, these rocks are going to, like these wet-looking rocks, are going to slowly start to follow them.
And take a decent perception check to even notice that they move slow enough.
Yeah, so that's kind of fun. Like, I like the idea of them getting to the end of the dungeon and turning around to leave, and there's like a pile of rocks just sitting there, and like, what
just blocking the way. These weren't here on the way through.
And then all of a sudden, everyone takes a whole bunch of psychic damage, and like it's 8 of them piled on top of each other. So 8 pseudopods just burst out like a fucking wall of tentacles.
Yeah, trench coat.
So, Terry, any ideas for a gray ooze?
Oh yeah, I think I would even try to use them not in a dungeon. I would maybe even try and use them as part of some sort of mystery, but it's a gray ooze coming through the pipes, coming out of the sewers, and leaving these skeletons, polished bones, something, and then going back in through the pipes, or using the false appearance. And I'd probably set it up as though it's something completely different, of course, but I think that would be an unexpected way to use an ooze like this.
Yeah, I like the idea of using specifically the corrode metal ability, right? Where it's going through either a large city's sewer systems or even within a dungeon itself, right? These gates, as you're going through the dungeon, you're noticing that all these gates have this similar form of just corroded holes in the middle of them. You can't find the source of it, but everywhere you go in this dungeon or in this sewer, there's holes in the middle everywhere. And it's new metalwork. Why is it corroded so quickly?
I also like it never says anywhere, but like it clearly does not erode rock. Right?
No.
So
and organic material. It doesn't say anything about flesh either in this one, not like the green slime, right?
Yeah, like I really like Terry's idea there, because now I'm doing a murder mystery, and the big clue is that there are these oily puddles left behind.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a skeleton there, and nobody knows what the hell is going on. And it turns out, like in the back alley on the cobblestone, there's all these oily puddles. If you touch it, they learn like it'll burn your hand away, right? So don't touch it. Your gloves get ruined the first time you poke it, but nobody thinks that that's the actual killer, right? They think it's evidence of the killer.
Yeah. What is the killer using?
Yeah.
Probably looking for some sort of alchemist or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Brad, do you have any further, or shall we move on?
No, I think I've covered what I want on that one.
All right. So there are 3 more Monster Manual oozes for us to cover. Let's grab dice, roll initiative, and see who's going first.
Let's do it.
All right. 3.
12.
5. Brad, you're up first.
All right. Well, I get to cover one of the absolute classics, and that is the Gelatinous Cube. If you've been playing D&D long enough or explored a dungeon or two, you've probably seen these things or come across them. They're pretty popular, and there's a good reason why. These things are a large ooze. So do we cover the fact that oozes are their own, class of creature? It's not just, they're not a subclass or subtype of something else.
Yeah, they tend to get lumped in with plants because nobody gives a shit, right?
Yeah.
But like they are their own thing.
They are their own subtype. So they are by default unaligned. We mentioned it earlier, Adam, but unless they are, Jublex is having his will imposed on them, they generally tend to be unaligned and neutral. These things are clocking in at a CR of 2. They got an AC of 6, so they're going to be pretty easy to hit. And their hit dice pool is 8d8 plus 40. Or sorry, 8d10 plus 40. So averaging 84, but you're probably going to bump it up. We discussed it, but oozes don't move fast. These ones are no exception. They move at 15 feet around. You're going to outrun them if you want to outrun them. They're not going to catch you. And they are not going to be quick on initiative either. -4 on the initiative. Like the other oozes we've discussed, the only stats that really stand out are a decent strength and a pretty good con. This one notably has a much higher constitution than the other two oozes we've discussed so far. And they're also immune to basically any conditions, right? Blinded, charmed, deafened, exhaustion, frightened, or prone. I don't know if we covered it, Adam, in the last one, but most of these oozes will have blind sight up to 60 feet.
Yeah, I mentioned it very briefly, but
yeah.
The other thing of note is that they're absolutely blind and unaware of anything beyond that 60 feet.
That's right. Yeah,
means,
no senses at all, right?
Yeah, which means if they're chasing you, right, and you get beyond that, they will just keep moving in that direction until they discover that there's
you turn a corner and they aren't going to find you unless you stop moving around a corner and try and hide. It'll detect you around the corner.
Yeah.
But yeah, so these things are, as I mentioned, they are large. So they take up a larger space than your average creature, right? 10 by 10. And the cube takes up its entire space, right? When we picture a large creature, yes, it fills a 10 by 10 area, but it's not taking up all that space. There's air gaps, things like that. With the ooze, no, it takes up the entirety of the space. If anything chooses to enter that space, it will be subjected to the cube's engulf ability, which we're going to cover in just a minute here. And it has disadvantage on the saving throw as soon as it enters the space of the ooze. Creatures inside the cube, you can actually see what is inside. So if it's consumed anything such as a skeleton or some weaponry or things like that, you can see it inside. And if you happen to get sucked up, your friends can see you floating around inside the thing. If you're inside of it, you can, or if you're outside of it, rather, you can reach in and try and pull your friend out. But doing so will take a DC 12 strength check, and you will take 3d6 acid damage just for attempting to pull your friend out. So win or lose, you're still taking that damage. The cube can only hold one creature up to size large, but if it's medium or smaller, it can fit 4 of you in there. So your whole party, if you're running a standard 4-person party, can get consumed by this thing.
Yay.
Yeah. Fun little feature with these guys as well. They are transparent. Obviously, I mentioned you could see things inside, but that means that they are very difficult to see. It's a DC 15 perception check just to spot this thing as long as it's not moving or in combat with you. So there's a very good chance, especially if your players don't have great passive perceptions and they're not making active perception checks, that they just walk right into this thing unless it's moving. So those are kind of the main features of this thing. We'll talk a bit about the combat statistics. Specifically, like all the others, it has a pseudopod. Interestingly enough, at CR2, this thing actually does less damage than the Grey Ooze does. It's only going to do 3d6 acid damage for an average of 10. So you got a CR and a half higher, but dealing 1 point less on average of damage per round.
But it's going to do it over and over and over again if you get engulfed.
If you get engulfed, yeah, that's the difference. Right?
Yeah, so it's going to
like the attack itself isn't the big threat here, it's the engulfing.
Yeah.
So again, that's the next feature we'll talk about here, the engulf. So the creature basically moves up to its speed, and it can enter the space of anything else that is large or smaller. In order to avoid being swallowed up, you got to make a DC 12 Dex saving throw. If you manage to make the save, you can be pushed 5 feet back or to the side. But if you choose not to be pushed, well, you're going to suffer the consequences of a failed saving throw. And the consequences of a failed saving throw are pretty powerful. So you're going to take 3d6 acid damage again, but then you're going to be engulfed. So while engulfed, you're not going to be able to breathe. You're going to have the restrained condition, and you're going to take an additional 6d6 acid damage at the start of each of the cube's turns, right? So the initial one, not so bad, 3d6, but every subsequent turn that you're still in there, if your friend hasn't pulled you out, 6d6. So that's not nothing.
This is, again, punching outside of its weight class.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think the reason that it's so high is because they're expecting, with only a DC 12 Dex saving throw to jump out, you're not going to feel too many of those. And again, you're moving minimum 10 feet faster than this thing, right? Even with your short little dwarven legs or halfling legs, you're still moving 25 feet.
Yeah.
Right? So you're going to outpace this thing. So just don't get in there is the idea. And getting somebody out's not especially terrible or difficult. But if you are engulfed, and as the cube moves along, because it's just going to keep moving once it swallows you up, it's going to keep looking for more food. You're going to be carried along with it, obviously. You don't get left behind. Once you are engulfed, when your turn comes around, you can make a DC 12 strength check. And if you manage to do so, you'll just basically heave your way out, right? Rip your way out from the inside, pop out in front of it or beside it. I would house rule that if you do that, you're going to land prone, so you're going to use half your movement standing up. You've used your action to get out, so all you've got left is your bonus action and half your movement.
I've done that as well, and because most characters can't move the 20 feet.
Yes.
Right? They don't have 40-foot movement, so half is.
There's a good chance you're going to get swallowed again if you don't make the next tick saving throw.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because honestly, if you can make it out and just start running, the threat's gone. It's really not that scary. But by making your players have to land prone, it ups the threat a little bit.
Only the rogue gets away because they can dash as a bonus action, right?
Yeah.
Or the monk with their crazy movement.
Yeah, or your tabaxi or somebody else, your champion fighter, something, or it's not champion, your was it gladiator paladin? So
which one?
The what's the gladiator? They don't call it the gladiator. What's the paladin subclass that?
Oath of Glory.
Oath of Glory. Yeah, they get extra movement as well.
Okay.
But there's a few options, but generally speaking, yeah, you're gonna catch your players off guard with that one. Lastly, before we move on, we'd be amiss if we don't mention the variant of the giant ooze that is in Dungeon of the Mad Mage. It is effectively the same. The stat block is the same across the board. There's only 3 really major differences. One being the fact that it goes from large to gargantuan. So you can imagine just the space that this thing's taking up now. However, interestingly, for the stat block, they don't use the hit dice for a gargantuan sized creature. I would personally. I would bump it up. Instead of 8d10, I'd make it 8d20, right? Because gargantuans, typically you should roll a d20 as the hit dice.
It depends if you want to keep it as a hazard, borderline mindless hazard, or a boss battle.
I mean, if I'm pulling this thing out, I think I want to use it as a bigger thing. If I just want a hazard, I can use the regular gelatinous cube.
Yeah.
But the other features of it are twofold. One, it can hold up to 9 large creatures or 36 medium. So gargantuan size, this thing's swallowing up a whole small village. And then the other one is it also gets a multi-attack. So instead of 1 of the pseudopod attacks, it does 4 of them, right? 4 just hunks of ooze swinging at you.
But again, it's crazy. The CR doesn't change on this.
No, the CR does not change. It's still considered a CR2 despite the fact that it is able to swallow more and has 3 additional attacks. So I think it's just an oversight. Don't throw this at your players as a CR2 creature. You will kill at least 1.
Yeah, I was gonna say I could probably kill a 4-person party at level 4. One of these.
Yeah, used well, absolutely. Especially as they're coming in to pull their friends out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this thing is, and the other thing it doesn't have that I would give it is reach.
Yeah.
Right. Why does that pseudopod attack not have reach?
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, but that's about it. Should we roll dice and discuss it?
Yeah, let's. At a 15.
I got an 11.
I rolled a 20.
Ooh.
You're on fire today, Terry.
I know 2 19s and a 20 I got. And then I got like a 4 and a 3 or something.
Do you have a role-playing hint for these guys? And okay, I'm gonna start off by saying we're not role-playing with any of these things. It's not like they have a personality, right? Like it's not a fucking thing. But
they have no intelligence. You're not conversing with. They don't even have a language. You can't speak to them or with them.
But you can interact with other NPCs that are reacting to them or interacting. There could be rumors around them. People could be using them as minions. So like, how are they involved in when we talk role playing? How are they involved in the world socially?
I feel, I think there is a simple amount of role playing you can do to bring these guys to life. You can have the gelatinous cube form still react when the human fighter holds the torch up against it. It still can ripple. It'll still start to move forward slowly and then try and increase its advance. And that really is role playing. It's just a very simple creature that you're playing the character of.
I like that.
My big thing with the gelatinous cube is that when it comes to role playing, I almost don't want to do any. I love it so much as a trap, right? My favorite thing to do is have the party look down this 10-foot by 10-foot shaft with a ladder that goes down. And it looks like it's just wet at the bottom. And they throw something down and it stops 10 feet from the floor and then sinks slowly the last 10 feet. And they're going to sit there and go, oh, it's full of water. Or if they don't recognize that it's shimmering because they get a really shitty perception check, oh, Featherfall is cast on it for the last 10 feet. And they will, without fail, descend into the gelatinous cube, right? So when it comes to role-playing, these guys are always ambushers. In my head, if they stay absolutely still, you won't even know that it's there until you're already engulfed. You've walked right into it. So it is their main hunt is going to be absolute stillness, because they want you to get close enough because they're not fast enough to catch you.
Right.
Yeah, they're ambush predators for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like, I don't want to put a lot of role playing into this because I don't want the players to know about it. The moment the players know that there's a potential coming across one of these things, the magic's gone.
Yeah.
You've lost the element of surprise, which is really what makes this thing worth its money. That said, if you really do want to give something, let's say that there's a section of the sewers that is impeccably clean, and anything something is left behind down there, it disappears. Your players might think, oh, there's kobolds or goblins or something down there that's, keeping track of this, that's scooping up whatever's left behind. They may not initially think Gelatinous Cube, but that's about as much as a hint as I'd be willing to give my players.
I always like the quest of, I need you to go get my thing, I left it down there, or and then you see it floating. My favorite one was they had to go everyone was scared of the floating skeleton in the caves.
Yep.
And it was just a dead body inside a gelatinous cube that was moving around.
I love that. And I might steal it, actually.
Terry, anything about exploration? I mean, we're kind of already borderline exploration anyway right now, but any other insights?
I mean, I think the exploration is part, making it part of the environment. I think you guys are right. I did it years ago myself by having a bunch of what looked like floating books and interesting things in a room off to the side, and it was all held within a gelatinous cube. That was early in my DMing as well.
I remember that. That was fun.
But the best thing I've encountered with exploration, Adam, was in your game, probably about 6 years ago now. And similar to what you described, I partook in, and my character was separated and did end up inside a gelatinous cube. Separate ended up inside a gelatinous cube, but because I'd split the party, nobody else knew that it had happened to me.
That is so much scarier.
So they were just off doing their thing, and no meta, right? So it's I was suffering trying to get out of that thing, and I couldn't. And I think the door had closed as well. I was completely separated and locked away from it. It was stressful. But making them traps, I agree completely. I think they're fantastic. They're an early way to stress the players that you really got to think outside of the box, and you got to think quickly. It's that first time you can stress players like that, and that's what I like to do. I like to, so they can learn, they get better after that, I think.
Yeah.
I remember what I did to you, Terry, and it was wonderful. Also, I really thoroughly enjoyed you trying to escape and pull yourself out, and like you would get your mouth and be like, help, and then just getting engulfed again, and so they would come run. It was so much fun. That role playing at the table was a lot of fun for that.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
My big thing is, and this is what I did to you, like there's a door or something, and the reason you say that is because it's a 10-foot wide hallway, because these things are 10 feet wide, right? So like,
oh, absolutely, to put them in any space where you can get around them is a failure of the DM.
Yeah, so it's 10 feet wide. Terry ran ahead, and he stepped into an area which triggered the portcullis that dropped behind him. 10 feet in front of it was the portcullis that dropped in front of him, and then the hatch in the ceiling opened, and it dropped a gelatinous cube, and there's nowhere for him to go. And no one can pull him out because it's right up against these metal grates. But here's the best thing about a gelatinous cube. You can't move through the grates, but it can.
Yeah.
And so it ended up moving half into the far gate so that the portcullis was blocking. They couldn't reach the 5 feet across this open area through their portcullis. They were watching Terry drowning inside the thing, getting eaten alive. Now, if I remember correctly, you did end up beating the strength save and spilling out into the open because it was half out of this little enclosure. However, there was a real moment of panic, like, what the fuck do we do? And the only saving grace, and like we were level 12, I think, right? Like it was sketchy.
I'm proud to say that if a D&D party is going to have a what the fuck do we do moment, I feel like I've provided a few of those moments in my parties over the years.
Yeah, you and Megan
only made them better, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, well, you were playing the party rogue as well, so this is what happens, right? But I remember you up against the portcullis and everybody else shooting around you, like all slammed up against, trying to push in wands and crossbows, like up against the portcullis, trying to shoot this thing as much as possible. And they're watching all of the bolts hit it and sink in and dissolve, right? Like it was very evocative in the description of it, and it was a lot of fun. Brad, do you have a exploration or environmental hint?
I like to pull off of the floating skeleton or some sort of floating mob inside of this thing. Specifically, as you come around a corner, I would like it to be kind of flush with that corner, because you know that it's going to be, your fighter or your paladin or one of your frontline fighters that's going to be leading the march. They're going to come around the corner. They see something floating there. What is the first thing that these players are going to do? They're going to charge at that thing that's floating and want to kill it. Especially if it's, a skeleton or something like that they know they're not going to try and converse with. You're going to come around the corner and your paladin's going to go, oh, I'm going to charge it. And boom, you're already in there. And that's the start of combat. You got your whole party kind of just coming around the corner, seeing the paladin rush in, and everybody's going to come around the corner to look and see where'd the paladin go. And now they're all right there, right? There's not a lot of room. So
I'm going to say the other thing that I remember doing as far as the environment goes with the trap was I put Dan's character, again, he was a rogue and he ran ahead of everybody else, and he turned a corner and a portcullis closed behind him.
Yeah.
And so he turned a corner and he saw there was a lever on the far wall. And again, my player should be suspicious anytime there's a 10-foot wide corridor that like shit's going to happen. So, but he saw it down at the end and he went over and he pulled the lever, but it was high up and he was playing a gnome. So he had to like get right up underneath it and jump. And so he grabbed it and he pulled it, and the lever did two things immediately. It detached from the wall and it opened up the pit trap beneath him. And the pit trap was exactly 10 feet deep.
Mm-hmm.
And so he landed on the spikes and he landed prone, and he looked over and saw that there's also a lever down here. But before he could deal with it, he took all this spike damage. And so he was already hurting, and he went and he pulled that lever thinking that that's going to be what he needs to do. But that just opened up the ceiling and dropped a gelatinous cube into the pit trap.
Into the pit. Yeah.
Right? So no, he was level like 16 at this point. So I had no problem just dropping shit like this on him like crazy.
Yeah.
There was a second gelatinous cube later with another lever, and he was running, and he had to swim through that one to get to safety. He had to purposefully dove into it.
Wow.
So,
that's a memory though.
Yeah.
It is kind of surprising that these things don't have some sort of resistance to piercing or slashing.
We're going to get into slashing bullshit in a little bit here, but yeah, I really do feel like they should be immune to piercing. They should just eat arrows.
Yeah, immune to piercing and maybe resistant to bludgeoning, and you usually slash and cut pieces off of it or something like that.
Bludgeoning is the one thing that should always work. You should always be able to beat it to death with a bat, right? Like that's the idea. Is always bludgeoning works against oozes the same way fire works against plants, right? Radiant works against undead. Necrotic works against celestials. Like there tends to be these unwritten rules.
Yeah.
So bludgeoning is the appropriate. It's like swarms, right?
Yeah.
Combat tactics, Terry.
Oh, for a gelatinous cube, it's stealth, really, isn't it? It's just it's trying to get the advantage by getting them to come to you, and then just continuing to try and engulf them and just being relentless. And I think still using the environment to your advantage, still trying to box them in. I would say probably just continue to advance on a single character and just stress that one character. It's when the party loses their full plan. They always have the same plan going in, and when you take that away from them early, they have no idea what to do with a stressful creature like this. So
I've always run a gelatinous cube where they hit with the pseudopod first. Someone gets pulled out of it, or they swim out and they land prone. And then on the next turn, the gelatinous cube hits them with the pseudopod and then engulfs them. Get that hit in before you engulf them. But I would like to point out that nowhere in the stat block does it say that, because it will often say if, for example, if you're in a Tyrannosaurus's mouth, you get bitten, you are restrained, and it cannot bite another creature, right? If you are in its stomach, then you are no longer getting bitten and nothing outside can attack you. This is not true for a gelatinous cube. The pseudopod can hit inside because a portion of it can get harder within the goop and bludgeon you inside as well. So just because you are engulfed does not mean that you are not getting hit by that by the 3d6 acid damage from the pseudopod as well, because the engulf is an action, but then when that happens, it's done, right? So like
I never thought of this.
It's not going to engulf you again on the next round. You just automatically take that damage. So what do you do with your action? Punch it. Beat it with your pseudopod.
So now you're taking 96 damage per round potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can go wrong quickly.
Yeah. I also would homebrew that pseudopod to also have a grapple effect.
Is it sticky?
I think so. It's
Yeah.
part of the creature itself. I like to think of the pseudopod reaching out, whacking you, and trying to pull you in. Right? If it can
wouldn't
hit you,
even
hold you in
say-
place, and then slide on top of you, I would like to use that as an ability as a DM.
I wouldn't even say sticky. Brad, what's the strength of it again?
The strength is 14. Like it's got a +2.
So it's the strength of the ooze, which is wrapping around you.
Yeah,
Which
it's more of an engulf than a stickiness, right? Where it's basically surrounding you. I picture it like flubber, right? Where this thing is coming out, an arm comes around, and it just swallows you up and pulls you in.
Fair enough.
I think that'd be a fun addition. But yeah, other than that, I mean, what's this thing's MO? It's to consume. So it is going to hunt you until you either get away from it and it loses track of you, or it consumes you. Those are the two end goals for the slime, or for the cube.
All right. I guess that brings us to our next ooze, which was, I think I rolled next highest.
I think so.
I want to talk for a moment about the Ochre Jelly. And the Ochre Jelly is the one that I always overlook and I never think about. And that's why I chose it for myself to sit down and go through, because it was time to learn about this motherfucker. So I just want to point out that it is an Ochre Jelly, OCHRE, which is the color. It's kind of like an off yellow. And it should not be confused with the Ogre Jelly, which is a brand of erotic massage oils in a particular brothel in Baldur's Gate. That's not strictly canon, but it fucking should be. So there we are.
It is in Adam's world.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
So Ochre Jellies, though, are large-sized yellow oozes that have one more sentence in the lore and description section than the gray ooze had. Like, there's fucking nothing on these things. The gist of them is simply that they're much larger and pretty smart for an ooze, which is to say that it has a whopping 2 intelligence.
Sorry, did you say the gist of them?
The gist of them.
Oh, my apologies.
Seems like a dog. Dogs have intelligence of 2.
Yeah, smart as a dog. This intelligence means that it is smart enough to avoid large groups of potential prey and to follow from a distance and attack when it's safest to do so. And that is specifically in the lore. So that is the main tactic, right? Avoid and follow. But for all of its increased menace and intelligence, it's still only a CR2. What was the Gelatinous Cube? That was CR2 as well, right?
CR2 as well, yeah.
So because it's not really acidic, that's why the Ochre Jelly, it doesn't have a big acid attack. In fact, it really only dissolves flesh, leaving bones, metal, wood, and other materials behind. Sidebar, I'm looking for an overall ruling from you guys here. Okay. When it comes to this magical creature in a fantasy game...
You picked a good spot to pause there, Adam, in your sentence.
You can't pause like that after you say that.
When it comes to a magical creature in a fantasy game, would you consider leather to still be flesh? Would leather be consumed by an Ochre Jelly?
Yes.
Yes. Organic material.
Okay. Cool. Just wanted to double check. Like it'll get all the food, right? But it specifically says flesh and it leaves bones behind. So
yeah, rules is written. I would say no, but I think you'd be silly not to roll that into it.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Is it going to cause more drama? Maybe.
Yeah, your players might get a little ticked with you.
Maybe not. It might not be worth it.
But just tell them it's homebrewed.
Well, look, the gray ooze does everything except fucking leather and cloth. So I'm gonna make the Ochre Jelly do leather and cloth and not any metal or wood. So
Sure. Yeah.
Anyway, when it comes to the stat block, it's similar to the gray ooze in most ways. So I'm just gonna focus on what's different here. As I mentioned, it's large size now. It has more hit points, but the AC and speeds are the same. And I'll talk about hit points in a minute. I will point out that the Ochre Jelly specifically gets spider climb so it can schlorp along the ceilings, implying that other oozes can't. They can just climb upwards at their regular speed. This spider climb feature replaces all that corrosive shit from the gray ooze and the false appearance to look like a wet rock. This is a giant blob of sickly yellow gelatin that sticks to ceilings. Whereas the gray ooze had resistances to acid, cold, and fire, the Ochre Jelly is resistant to only acid. All the condition immunities are the same, and it can squeeze through 1-inch wide gaps. Could the Gelatinous Cube do that as well?
No, the cube cannot do the squeeze.
I think it's the only one we're talking about today that doesn't.
Yeah, and I think that's purely just due to the size and the nature of it, right? The shape is a true cube. It's like Jell-O.
Yeah. The pseudopod attack, which is its only action, does 2d6 plus 2 bludgeoning plus 1d6 acid damage. And that means that while the CR half, Gray Ooze, was terrorizing a low-level party with an average of 11 points of damage, the CR2 Ochre Jelly is doing a whopping average of 12.
Again, still outpacing the Gelatinous Cube.
except for that engulf.
Except for engulf. But it has to get the engulf, right?
Yeah. So what makes the Ochre Jelly so special? It's not just a spider clan. It's because it's immune to lightning and slashing damage. Bear with me. This immunity comes with a special reaction. If the Ochre Jelly is hit by lightning or slashing damage and it's large or medium sized, I'll explain that in a sec, and has more than 10 hit points, it immediately uses its reaction to split into 2 Ochre Jellies, one size category smaller, dividing the remaining hit points in half for each of the new jellies. So this is one of the only creatures in all of 5th edition that is likely to actually use the action economy in a way that the players are not used to seeing. Because now the Ochre Jelly has more than one suit upon attack, because it's technically 2. But how bad is it really? Well, if we look at the actual mechanics of its hit points, it's 6d10 plus 12, which is an average of 45, but don't use the average for the creature. Instead, use its maximum so it can actually use its feature more than once and terrify the player characters. Because 45 hit points against a party of 4 adventurers will last about a round. And if that melee attack isn't with the sword, dagger, whip, or axe, then it's not going to trigger the effect. And most of the good lightning spells aren't even available at low level.
Yeah.
But the maximum hit points, which are 72, should last until at least round 3 of combat, giving the Ochre Jelly the opportunity to retreat through a hole in the stonework of the dungeon, and then come back once more once the party has settled down into a long rest. Because these things avoid and stalk. That's their deal. So they want to split, and there's no mechanic for them to rejoin, but I would absolutely have them.
That was gonna be my question. Would you allow it to, rejoin itself? And absolutely I would as well.
So let's grab dice roll initiative.
All right.
That is a 4.
Oh, I got both of you guys combined with a 7. So for role playing, I don't know why I want to give this one like the attitude of a starving dog.
You can give it a slight personality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to recoil from damage in a way that the other ones won't, right? It's going to try to stay outside of your range, right? But it still is guilty of all of the regular ooze shit, right? It's still hungry, it's still mildly acidic at the very least, and it's still attracted to fire and movement. So it's got the same blind sight stuff. So it is going to slurp along after you, but it's going to be hard because it doesn't really have a bonus that's worthy of stealth, right? So if it can't be quiet, and it is a large sized creature that it has to be a maximum of 60 feet away from you, which is what everybody's dark vision is in the first place.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they're gonna see it. How does this thing sneak up? And I feel like the way that you do this is by making it very long and skinny and getting it to work through cracks and go through grates and pipes and grout work in the cobblestone, right? And so it's going to shift and move and slither along.
Yeah.
So, and then rise up to like interact in almost like a dog. Like that's kind of the attitude that I would give it.
Yeah. We haven't said it explicitly, but with all these oozes, I feel like they tend to be a product of their own environment, right? So you are always in their hunting grounds. You're always in their space. So the space is going to be designed around them to allow them to make use of their abilities and their advantages. So like you said, with the grates or popping out of pipes or even just laying in a puddle, right? These things are going to be used to living in darker, dimmer environments, wetter environments. Their whole nature is going to be surprising you. So they're going to blend in. Even being bright yellow doesn't mean it's not necessarily going to not stand out, right? We talked about yellow molds and black molds and things like that as well. Like, this thing you could probably walk by a couple patches of a yellow mold on a wall and nothing may happen, or you may interact with it like a regular mold, but one of them all of a sudden is actually an ooze and it's going to behave differently.
Yeah, I think that these ones, also their ability to split and whatnot, I feel like they're still going to work together. They're going to have, I mean, they don't get pack tactics, but they'll definitely be aware of what the other half is doing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, they're sharing one mind, right? I would still say even when it splits, it's a single mind.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, that's a good reason for them to work together.
Terry, do you have any insights for role playing for these guys?
Role playing, it's just going to be, I think things knowing to stay still as long as possible. And it's okay to showcase it, to show it off, to show the ochre colored jelly off and see what the players do. It's not reacting to them. It'll maybe go deeper. They'll go deeper into the dungeon. Maybe there's 2 or 3. And then whatever the main encounter is towards the end, have them come to life then on the way out, to add to that encounter. I think you can build tension with these in a different way by having them in plain sight, but they're not doing anything yet. And I think that'll build tension.
For exploration pillar, I want everything in here to have residue, like just a little yellowy residue, right?
Mhm.
Whenever you enter their domain, because like you said, Brad, you're going into its home. It's not like some of the other oozes we'll talk about in future episodes, which are ambulatory and gonna like go explore the world or hunt or set traps or shit. These are cavern dwellers. They're dungeon dwellers, right? So they avoid the sunlight. So you're coming in, you're serving up a fucking buffet.
Yeah, absolutely.
For these guys. So I want
Meals on wheels.
Yeah, I want there to be evidence around of all of their previous kills. And because they only eat flesh, you're going to see skeletons in armor just like laying down on the ground all over. Like this is your traditional, you walk into the room and just see a bunch of dead warriors still in their garb with their their backpack and benching bag on. The sword is still in their hand. They haven't been looted. They were clearly fighting something, and the whole room is just covered in a very thin, like yellow residue.
Yeah. I also reread that line we were talking about earlier with dissolving flesh quickly.
Yeah.
It says, but have no effect on other substances. And I think I might actually leave leather and cloth behind.
Yeah.
I think just for flavor, right? It is specifically flesh. They feed on the flesh of creatures, right? It's dried out, right? Leather's dried out. It's lost the
it's been cured, right? Like just chemicals applied to it, right?
Yeah. So it's already lost its desirability for an ooze, in my opinion. So I think I might backtrack on what we said earlier.
Now we didn't touch on this, but Zhublex and Zugtamoy are partners. They're demon lords that are partners, and she is like the fungal queen and he is like the demon lord of oozes. Do you expect that like it's not going to eat plant matter? Veggie pygmies and myconids and stuff would be just fine around them?
Yeah, it expressly says flesh but no effect on any other substances.
So, but like you would not include flowers and grass as flesh in that context?
No, I think it's supposed to be meat. I would consider it to be animal flesh.
Do you think then that it's going to ignore autognomes?
Yes, it's going to ignore anything mechanical, anything that is not flesh. I think it's just straight up going to be uninterested.
Just a point of note then, Warforged is still fair game because they've got like wood-like and metal-like flesh. And that's very specific in the book. So okay. Terry, any insights on exploration?
Exploration, I think they're getting to the size where it depends where you want to keep them. I know they go after flesh, but something I found with oozes is the way that they would move, they would still always clear their path. And I think that's a sign that you have something of a bulky kind of hulking figure. They're not dissolving, but the way that they'll move, they'll always clear things off to the side, and you'll
push it out of the way. Yeah, they're sliding through it.
Yeah, you'll see a very clear path everywhere you go. So when you start to see that type of thing, that would certainly demonstrate an ooze. And then for this particular type of ooze, because it's going after flesh and it's dissolving flesh, you're going to see small game, I think, everywhere.
Yeah, rodents.
You're going to see a lot of rats. That's the easy kind of prey, right? A lot of maybe unusual creatures that ended up in there. But certainly a lot of evidence of dissolved bodies of all different kinds for this particular ooze.
The other thing to point out too is because they have spider climb, they'll get bats.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Exactly.
And in fact, I think a lot of the evidence of this thing is going to be on the ceiling. If you look at the floor, I think there might be stuff scattered on the floor that's fallen out of the oozes, right? All the stuff it doesn't consume. But if you're looking for actual evidence of the ooze itself, it's going to be on the ceiling, like any remnants or slime left behind or anything like that. It's going to be on the walls and the ceiling. I don't think it's going to be on the ground.
Mm-hmm. I agree. So, combat. Now, one of the things that I absolutely hate, Terry, you pointed this out back in like episode 4, and like we have been talking about it since, is the absolutely perfect, finely swept floor of your dungeon, and that there's no dirt or grime, or it's just a perfect stone room with a door on one end and a door on the other, and this is where all dungeons have combat.
I got that from Dave, I think.
Was that from Dave?
Dave said he likes a finely swept stone floor on a Thursday or something. That's where I got it from.
It's always 2 p.m, and And the kidnapped bartender's daughter is always beautiful. But when it comes to oozes, when there's an ooze around, I think it is finely swept. I think it is clean, right? And so when it comes to combat, I think that with an ochre jelly specifically, that's not the case. It's not clean. It's leaving debris behind all of the time. And if it has a favorite hunting ground, and it would because it's a little bit more intelligent, whereas like the gray ooze isn't, right? The ochre jelly is. It's going to have its own little lair or den or wherever. It will have a safe place to retreat to, and that safe place will be nearby. Like it will have that 1 inch wide square to get through, right? Mm-hmm. But then I think it hunts from the ceiling, which means it is going to choose a place that has 15 foot, like I'm going to say 10 to 15 foot ceilings, because it's large and because its pseudopod has 5 foot reach and because most player characters are over 6 feet tall, it should be able to reach down and hit you from above.
Yeah.
And there's not a damn thing here. And I do this with all of my humanoids and half of my monstrosities, almost every aberration. Just because it's not included in the stat block doesn't mean they can't grapple.
Yeah.
An ochre jelly should grapple and pull you up to the ceiling. And if you're 15 feet up, when you get released, you drop, and that's a d6 of damage.
Yep.
Right? So
now you're prone.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot to be said for the splitting reaction here, but I really want to focus on the spider climb and the pseudopods here, is having these thick, yellow, slimy, like tentacles coming down from the ceiling, all descending at once before they hit. And you look up and see the entire ceiling is just a yellow sea of rippling goop. And there's 4 of them up there. And they're all just reaching down to pick you up and pull you up and batter you while you're up there, right?
Yeah. I've got 2 bits I'd like to kind of pull on. One of which being, again, you talked about things that aren't in the stat block. I could see this thing, especially if it's up on a ceiling, maybe it's 20 feet up instead of 15 feet up. So it's just out of reach. But because it doesn't consume metal, it doesn't consume non-organic material, it doesn't consume anything other than flesh, give it a throwing attack. Use its strength modifier and let it throw rocks or skulls or things like that at the players. It might not do a lot of damage, but it's going to pester them. It's going to annoy them. And it's going to be just out of reach enough to get their attention.
I love the idea that it's not actually throwing. It's just like letting the skulls and helms and shit
just
bubble to the surface and drop, right?
Yeah. Another option too. But yeah, let it make some improvised weapon attacks from range and just kind of pester your players. And then the other thing I want to touch on with this is going to be a hit and run creature. Again, you are in its domain. It can squeeze into a 1 inch crack. You're going to tell me that your dungeon or your cellar or wherever this thing is hiding isn't full of 1 inch spaces where this thing can just squeeze between a wall and get away?
Well, that's an interesting point too, is if there's debris everywhere, you should make it difficult terrain, but because this thing can squeeze through these 1 inch wide openings, it ignores difficult terrain because it's just going to essentially roll over it, right?
Yeah.
Leaving it behind.
Yeah, I mean, it's only a 10-foot movement, so why would it not ignore terrain? But that said, I mean, it's going to hit you, and then it's going to duck out into a wall and hide somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Terry, any thoughts?
For combat, I think this one, because it's a little more intelligent, I feel like when I think of it having the same intelligence as a dog still has basic tactics to it. So the other oozes seem to be relentless in that they'll just keep moving forwards. This one maybe wouldn't. This one maybe would try to take a different angle or know or understand where it can reach and you can't reach. So even though it's relentless, it's going to be somewhat calculating. To the point where it's going to be a lot harder to deal with it, because now you can really make the encounter more exciting with the environment for the combat, because this jelly will think to move into the cracks through the passage, come out this way, and then come down. It has enough intelligence to act like that. The monsters know what they're doing, right? That's the way I would think of it with this ooze.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, and I would actually give this thing pretty much full cover, or at least partial cover, every time you're attacking it from range, because this thing is going to be hiding amongst its debris. It's going to be hiding in places where it's going to be hard to hit.
Even if there's just a bunch of shallow cracks in the wall, it's going to squish itself into those, so only half of it's available.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's going to have that most, or at least, half cover at any given time.
I would do this for the Gray Ooze as well.
Yes.
It also has that feature. And transitioning nicely into the next one, the Black Pudding.
Yeah. Adam, I always say I get the good ones. I feel like I got the good one with this as well. I don't know
This one's my favorite. Yeah.
I don't know
It
if you're
is a
doing
good
it
one.
deliberately or what, but I felt like this was a good one for me. So black puddings, quick sidebar on this. When I was looking for real life lore on black puddings, it was very difficult because he kept just bringing up the British food of black pudding, which everybody.
That's why you got it.
America, they'll call it blood pudding, we call it other things, but in the UK we call it black pudding. And so I was wondering, have either of you ever tried black pudding before?
Yeah.
I have.
What
Yeah.
did you think of it?
I
liked
was
it.
young, so I thought it was terrible. I think if I were to try it now, I'd be a little more open to it.
Right. You know what, Brad, I would agree with that. When I was younger, I didn't enjoy it either, but now I really do. It's yeah, there's some haters out there that don't, but I would say it's probably one of my favorite parts of a breakfast, actually. But anyway, back to this black pudding. Like other oozes, black puddings desire warmth and sense their prey through movement with their blind sight. While they will go after creatures that are living and breathing targets, they will also feast on animal guts or slime or mushroom as well to survive. And black puddings are usually found inhabiting warm, damp areas. And so I think like kind of half submerged buildings, temples, even ships. When I think like trying to be warm, if there's anything in there, and kind of damp as well. But
That's brilliant, Terry. That is brilliant. That is the the Mary Celeste.
Yeah.
Right. Imagine that the Mary Celeste, everyone's gone missing and nobody knows why, and everything's set up normally because a fucking black pudding was in the cargo hold.
Exactly. There you go. So black puddings, they're large ooze as well, on a line, just like the others. Armor class of 7. Their hit points on average are 85, but if you do want to max it out to make it more challenging, it's 10d10 plus 30. They have a standard walking speed of 20 feet. They also have climb of 20 feet as well. Their two main stats are strength and constitution, both at 16. Everything else is lower. The intelligence is the lowest at 1, so not as intelligent as the Ochre Jelly, which makes me think that they will operate mostly of instinct, really. Damage immunities, acid, cold, lightning, slashing. The challenge rating is 4. So again, this kind of feels like it could be the first kind of scary boss that isn't just a goblin leader or something. So yeah, damage immunities, acid, cold, lightning, slashing, condition immunities, blinded, charmed, deafened, exhaustion, frightened, prone, blind sight of 60 feet, just like the others, but they are blind beyond that. No languages, and to get into their fun characteristics and abilities, they're amorphous, so they can move through the space as narrow as 1 inch as well. They have a corrosive form, so a creature that touches the pudding or hits it with a melee attack within 5 feet of it will take 1d8 damage, and then any non-magical weapons made of metal or wood that it hits the pudding corrodes. After dealing the damage, the weapon takes a permanent and cumulative -1 penalty to the damage rolls. We've seen it with a couple of the others as well. Spider climb, and then they also have a pseudopod attack, +5 to hit for the black pudding, 5-foot reach, and we're looking at 1d6 plus 3 bludgeoning damage, plus 4d8 acid damage, and then in addition, it's that -1 penalty to weapons and armor to their AC.
Love it.
Then they also have the split reaction as well. So some of their abilities we've seen in the other oozes, just kind of in a different combination. But that's the black pudding. What do you think of when you think of this? I just think it's mostly working off instinct, relentless again, but hiding in the darker, creepier areas, especially because it's a black pudding. You have an excuse for it to still be somewhat invisible or difficult to see in darkness as well.
Whenever I think of the black pudding, I always think of the movie Creepshow 2, which is so 80s of me, but I mean, I was an 80s kid. Creepshow 2 has 3 little stories in it, like it's an anthology, and the middle one is called The Raft. And the idea is that there's a lake and a bunch of teenagers going out to make out and do drugs and drink out on this like little swimming platform in the middle of the lake. But there's been some sort of toxic spill, but the toxic spill eats people. And it just glides across the surface of the lake and just fucking reaches up through the like little boards on the raft and like systematically starts picking off the teenagers. And just like the gore of it is so good for the practical effects, because it grabs on and then as it pulls away, you see the flesh like sloughing off as it like burns away. It's really gross, really cheesy, and really cool, but that's what I think of with black pudding. I saw that, I think I was like 13. It was one of the first horror movies I ever saw, and for some reason it is one of my favorites. It is so bad, but this is why I love the black pudding like I do. I have to be clear, I do not recommend this movie, but it's if anyone has seen the movie, that's what I think of. And so whenever I see a black pudding, I also want it floating across the surface of the water, right?
Yeah.
So anyways, let's grab dice and let's
do it. That's a 9. You got your 20, Adam?
I got my natural 20. So,
Good.
role playing for these guys. Again, there's not much to them because they're like, they've got a 1 in charisma and a 1 in intelligence. Like, there's not a whole bunch going on here. But I will say this, there's something about them that makes them more malevolent than the others. While all of the other ones are eating to survive, this one, I think, likes to kill. And I don't know why, but that's the feel I get off of the art, and that's the feel I get off of every time I've used one.
Yeah, the art for this one is explicitly showing it consuming. I'm assuming that's an ogre.
Yeah, that's an ogre.
And the other ones have just been kind of, a block of slime. Maybe it had something floating in it, but that was it. This is the first one that really shows it. So I think that's probably the reasoning behind that. Yeah. Would you roll, Terry?
I rolled a 2.
All right.
That's me. When Adam, you got me thinking there where you said that it likes killing, and I thought, well, if the charisma is low, if the intelligence is low, how can I demonstrate that? I would have to demonstrate in the most basic form, which would be, I would probably describe the pseudopod attack. It has pseudopod attack, right?
Yep.
It does.
Yep.
The pseudopod attack as, in a way, being more passionate, like it's really trying to wrap you tight and pull you in almost passionately. Like you can demonstrate that it's excited to kill you. It's not just doing it instinctually.
What's interesting here is there's an implication with the black pudding and to a lesser degree the ochre jelly, where it does engulf. It can get into your space and wrap you up.
Yeah.
And I'm not crazy on this because when you look at the mini for the black pudding, it's large sized, but it is also open like a bowl, and you're supposed to put other minis inside of it. But there's nothing like that in the stat block. When you look at the art, that ogre is getting pulled down into the
It is. Yeah.
Right. So that's why I feel like this has got more malevolent nature to it, is it wants to just coat you like the Venom symbiont and burn every inch of you, right? When it comes to the environment, it's got all of this thing is essentially a gray ooze plus a ochre jelly.
Yeah, 2 combined.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With a pile more hit points. I think the reason these things are such low challenge ratings is because they're easy to hit and they have no dex. Like, you're going to land your hit. You are meant to kill these things and exterminate, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't take much to raise the AC to make this a fuck of a lot deadlier, because if you cannot fight back, you're in a lot of trouble. So when I look at the environment for this one, I feel like this is another case of it is not smart like the ochre jelly, so it's not going to work itself into cracks. It's not going to have an escape route necessarily, which means it's going to be in attack mode all of the time.
Yeah.
But it's also going to be completely, it dissolves everything, right?
Yeah.
Flesh, wood, metal.
Everything but stone.
Everything but stone. So this is your fucking Roomba in the dungeon, right? I'm going to lean into the fact that every footstep echoes in here, and there's not even a speck of dust as far as the eye can see.
Yeah, no, it's perfectly clean. I would also be playing, it mentions here a little bit in the description, I'd be playing with shadows with this thing, right? In the dungeon, you're holding your torch for that one player that doesn't have dark vision, right? And a light is kind of going to flicker off of something in a corner, and it looks almost like a shadow is moving, but it's going to be a misdirect, right? Because they're going to think, oh, it's a cast shadow, so the thing that's moving must be in the other direction, casting off the shadow, when in fact the shadow itself is the black pudding. Yeah, because it says the pudding appears to be little more than a blot of shadow. So I would really try and play with shadow and light when describing the room to try and draw the players in, perhaps to another space, and then get attacked from behind by this thing. And yeah, you're going to describe it as pulling them in, wrapping around like chains.
Yeah, for me, for the environment, for exploration, the way I'm going to get my players to interact with this environment is because this creature corrodes everything apart from stone. All of the loot, all of the chests, everything will be damaged and corroded and clearly not of any worth, which means I can set an environment where I can put chests which are clearly corroded and everything is not worth anything in there, but make the magic items very visible and put them in positions where I want the party to try and interact with the environment in that way. So really what this creature does is allows us to make things within the dungeon very tempting for players to interact with. So I think that's what excites me when I think exploration with a black pudding.
I love that, especially when you go into like a crypt or a mausoleum or something where you've got little stone pedestals with items on top of them. The black pudding doesn't dissolve the stone, but is going to clean up all around it. So that item is very much the thing in the room.
Yeah.
Right.
And what are we going to do? Just not touch it?
Yeah, right.
Not try it? Not try
Well, it's got to be cursed.
Yeah.
So let's talk about combat for a second here. I don't feel like these guys are stalking the way that the Ochre Jelly. But I do think that that they are going to operate like a big gray ooze in a lot of ways. It said, the gray ooze slithers like a liquid snake rising to strike. I see the black pudding doing that, except instead of one like little liquid snake, it's got like a base of the body, and you have multiple pseudopods coming up out of it, even if only one can attack at a time. I hate that only one can attack at a time, and I have no problem making this a CR5 creature by giving it multi-attack.
Yeah.
Right. So that's what I want. I want an engulf. I want a multi-attack.
Yeah.
I want, if I can do spider climb, I want this thing to be sticky, like a mimic. So like you're hitting it with acid, but they also have to roll an escape check to get free of it. Right. So I want the best of all worlds. Black pudding should be so scary.
Yeah.
It's like you said, Terry. It comes down to, this should be like the little boss at the end of tier 1 that's not a humanoid, right?
Yeah, the art makes this thing a lot scarier than the stat block does. You mentioned with the Ochre Jellies, the grapple. You should be grappling with this thing on every attack.
Yeah.
Separate from, right, the Ochre Jelly was up, reaching down and trying to pull you up. This one is going to be attached firmly to the ground, strapping you down, holding you in place, and should be auto hitting if you don't escape that grapple. That's the things that I would do to make this thing a little bit scarier, a little bit tougher, and really more to fit the art and the design of it rather than the stat block.
Yeah, I agree.
This one, with the way that it is and the way that it's going to attack and be quite instinctual, I feel like for combat, I want to put it in the dark, and I want to, even with dark vision, it's still going to be challenging to see properly because of how it's supposed to look like shadow anyway. It's not going to be clear even if you have dark vision, you see in grayscale. But I want this to be the thing which is terrifying for the human fighter, who's the only person that can't see. And we always forget, by the time we get to the main room, or the penultimate room in the dungeon, we forget that the human fighter can't see.
Yeah.
And this is the perfect stressful creature for a low-level human fighter that can't see and doesn't understand that it can't slash at it, and doesn't understand that every time it does, it makes the situation harder for it. And the wizard is wasting his words on speaking and things, and it becomes very stressful for one player, where this is what I keep going back to, is trying to test them in different ways for the first time, because up until this point they'll have worked together. But if you can get that one character that doesn't have dark vision and give it this completely different type of creature, it's going to be stressful, just constantly on the same character.
Oh yeah, these things are absolutely relentless in their combat, right? They're going to pick somebody and pin them down
After the same person. Yeah.
I mean, if that person happens to get away, sure, it'll probably take the next one. And they don't have intelligence, but they're gonna pick on the weakest, smallest thing, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, because it made a point of saying the Ochre Jelly is smart enough to avoid large groups and stuff. I think the black pudding might just be ravenous enough to go after the biggest one, because it will eat everything.
But I would also play it like, it doesn't matter who's attacking it from the outside. Once it has its tendrils on you,
Yes. Yeah.
then it is not letting go, and it is not going to let you get away.
Yeah, I agree.
And it doesn't even care what happens to itself. It just cares about consuming you.
I almost wish that for the gelatinous cube and the black pudding, because I'm giving the black pudding an engulf, right?
Yes.
I wish that they would heal a certain amount, like half of the damage they inflict when they've engulfed something, right? Like, I want that idea of them dissolving and absorbing the life and the flesh from a creature.
Yeah, I'm on board with that.
All right. Anyway, before we splash our way through any more of this, let's jump into a last info break.
If you've been inspired by the conversation in this episode, please feel free to reach out and share your creativity and ideas with us and the rest of the community. You can reach us on Facebook and Instagram, or on our subreddit at r/it'samimic. Also, if you're feeling particularly generous, please follow and subscribe and leave us positive reviews, likes, and comments. Engagement like that helps us pop up on search engines and keep this show running.
All right, so we've talked a lot about oozes in their different forms today, and the different ways that they consume, how they're all consuming. I think our biggest takeaways here are they need to be environmental hazards, as more so even than combat hazards. They are relentless, they are dangerous, and they are scary. They should be, though the stat blocks don't always encourage the type of play, they should be grappling creatures. They should be, waiting, lying in wait, and jumping you at opportune moments, because you are in there lair. And those are kind of my final thoughts, inspirations. Do you guys have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I would like to add, I think this is the first time, if you're playing with new players, and I love playing with new players or lesser experienced players, because you see that genuine sense of wonder and
Yeah,
what
they're
the hell is
excited.
going on. This is a perfect creature for that. And it's the first time in the game that you can tell your players everything on the character sheet is fair game. And today I came after your gear. And
Yeah.
this is what this game is. It's more than hit points. So as you go through these next few adventures, every time you go into the unknown, just know now that everything is fair game on that character sheet. And that's what Oozes can do for you.
Yes, absolutely. And if I can be honest, I have Mieka. She's split off from the rest of the party again. She is trapped in a labyrinth by herself for the next few months. And I'm going to throw Oozes at her now. She has no idea what's coming. Because I think she's only ever met a Gelatinous Cube, and it was a long time ago.
Most players, that's about all they meet out of the Ooze family. So
yeah. My final inspiration here is I'm always a big fan of when there's like a death mechanic, like when a creature dies, a death burst or something happens. There's one final thing. But I also like the idea, and I don't do this enough, of special killing moves that creatures have to get that final thing in. Like when a gnoll gets the kill, they tear the throat out with their teeth. For an ooze, not the gelatinous cube, but for the other ones that we've talked about today, the gray ooze, the ochre jelly, and the black pudding, I think their kill move is they get into an orifice on the head.
Yep.
And they slurp in through a nostril or in through the ear or down.
Or a screaming mouth, right?
Yeah. And then just start to like slurp in because it's a like 1 inch wide space. They'll get in there and then just burn with acid from the inside out. And
yeah, I guess that's one thing we didn't really touch on. Death saving throws with these things. I feel like especially the black pudding, it's not going to let you make your death saving throws. It is just going to consume you until you're gone.
Yeah, and with the gray ooze, you're not able to scrape it off if you're unconscious, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So you're in a fuck ton of trouble if you go down with these.
And if you're inside the gelatinous cube, no one's getting inside to heal you. I'm not going to let the players heal from outside on the gelatinous cube. If you're inside, I don't care if they can see you. I don't think that your spells should be able to go in.
No, if there's a range, that means it has to travel from you to the thing, and you're just going to end up healing a gelatinous cube. So yeah.
Anyway, that's all for this part of our conversation on Oozes in D&D 5th edition. Please take a second to engage with a like, follow, comment, and review to help push our engagement. And don't forget to subscribe to find future inspirations for your campaigns.
If you'd like to support us, we have a store with some merch and a donate button on our website. It's mimic.com, as well as a Patreon. These episodes and others can also be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and most other podcast apps. Thanks again for listening to It's a Mimic, where you never know what you're going to get.
This has been an It's a Mimic production. Please check the show notes for this episode to see links, time codes, and credits. And don't forget to reach out and share your own inspirations.
Any thoughts about this one before we get started? You guys excited? Terry, are you excited to do 3 weeks of Oozes?
I actually am excited to do 3 weeks of Oozes. Yeah.
You could say he's oozing with excitement.
Oh, immediately. No, I'm looking forward to it. I've never really explored Oozes, and they're creepy, and I'm embracing the creepier side of the monsters these days. So yeah, it's going to work for me.
I'm really looking forward to them because the first episode is like, here are the classics. The second episode is like, here's the weird ones. And the third episode is just going to make you angry because they're just the dumb ones. So
I feel like I got the classicest of the classics.
Yeah. I think so. I've used a gelatinous cube more than anything else in any of my
it's most interesting to me, but we'll cover it.
I think I used one like a month ago, actually. So anyways, let me put my phone on silent because I don't want to be that guy. And then we can kick off whenever you're ready, Red.
It's actually Terry starting us today.
Or that.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, the cold open's mine.
And we're out.
We did it again, you guys.
Thanks, guys. That was a fun one.
No, that was good. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. That was a good episode.
All right. Thank you, guys. Have a great night.
Yep,
You
too.
too.
See you later.
Why are you still here? Leave already.